The worst night of my life. Context. I was 19 years old and had just moved to Aigan to start my first year of higher education. It was a Sunday towards the end of September 2015, and it was already very dark in the evening, almost night. I was coming back from Toulouse after spending a weekend celebrating a friend's birthday. I had chosen to take a late-night train to return to Aigan to enjoy my afternoon in Toulouse with my friends. I arrived at Aigan train station around 9:50 p.m. and still had to walk for 30 minutes to get home. Being new to Aigan, it was the first time I was crossing the city in the middle of the night. Throughout my life, I had never had any problems before, so I was neither worried nor frightened to go home alone, on foot, and in the middle of the night. The story. As I left the station, I saw a small group of guys smoking in front of the station. I didn't pay much attention to them. I put on my headphones, played my music, and started walking home. The only route I knew to get home at that time was a long straight line, then turn left at Palissy Park, and another long straight line. Very simple. I was still on my first straight line, headphones on. The lights were still good, but I could see that they were starting to fade in the distance. And I hadn't planned for it, but for the moment, it didn't bother me. I then noticed that someone was walking behind me, wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood on. He was probably going home too. 15 minutes later, the guy was still there. The lighting was gradually fading, and I felt that something was wrong. Stress began to build up in me. I tried to ignore it, and foolishly, I started turning up the volume on my phone to focus on the music I was listening to. Near the park, the lighting was almost non-existent. I was really starting to panic because the guy was still walking behind me. I started walking faster. I had the choice to either cross the park or go around it. Thinking the worst, I thought it was better for me to stay on the sidewalk to go along all the houses in the city center. Just in case, there might have been people to hear or see something in the worst-case scenario. Out of fear and for safety, I decided to go around the park. He decided to cut through the park, which gave him a bit of a distance advantage. Despite the darkness, I could see his silhouette moving in the park, and I could see that he turned around almost every 2 minutes to see where I was. I walked very quickly, even faster, to create distance because the more I saw him move forward, the more I felt he was going to catch up with me at the park exit. I managed to gain some distance and maintained my walking speed. I was very scared. There was no light at all, it was really pitch black. I dared neither to run nor to turn around. I was afraid he would start running after me, and especially that he would catch up. I was afraid to see and know the distance he was at and that he would see my fear. I was afraid, and I preferred to focus on my walk and speed. I wanted to remain discreet, but the anxiety was so strong that I started crying. I did everything not to make noise, not to let him hear me cry. The idea that he might perceive my vulnerability scared me. I was afraid it would give him more power/strength, and that it would paralyze me even more. Around me, there was no light, no houses, no cars. Just him following me and me. I was really alone for 5 long, very long, minutes. The more I walked, the more I realized that we were both walking towards my home. I had to think about changing direction, but there was no other way. The next intersection was still far away. Tears were flowing freely down my cheeks. The lump in my stomach was getting heavier and heavier. And I was starting to have a pretty bad side stitch. Arriving at the intersection, I crossed without even looking if there were cars. I just went for it. The street was a bit brighter, but it was still very calm. No one. No cars. I wanted to enter an apartment/house, anyone. Pretend it was mine and ask for help, but I didn't have the courage. After 3 to 4 minutes of crossing the intersection, I saw another man, around 40 years old. He was making big gestures for me to stop. I was petrified. I tried to ignore him. I thought maybe they were together. He kept walking at my pace and continued to make big gestures. and I saw that he was gesturing for me to take off my headphones. Which I did. The man in his 40s said,
"Miss, I crossed paths with you with my wife and son further down. The man behind you has been following you for a while. I followed you to make sure everything would be okay for you, but I saw him start running after you, and I started running too to warn you. Come to this side of the sidewalk. I'm with you. You're not alone anymore. Don't worry."
I immediately saw his fear and felt the fear in his voice. Without asking any questions, I crossed the road to join him, and I collapsed in tears. He tried to reassure me, but I couldn't calm down. I was trembling all over. When the man came to talk to me, the guy who was following me was still behind me. We both watched him leave. It was the first time I saw him so close and so clearly. The man who joined me explained that he ran the tobacco shop on the street facing the station and that they were closing when I passed by. He also was convinced that the guy who was following me meant me harm. We sat on the sidewalk for about 30 minutes, the time it took for me to regain my composure. And he kindly walked me home. The man thought that I hadn't noticed at all that the guy was following me. He told me later that the guy started running when we were in complete darkness, and he was really close to me. The man started shouting, and the guy who was following me suddenly slowed down. He was probably going to do something, but the man's shout discouraged him. On my part, I was in front, way too scared to turn around and with loud music in my headphones. I hadn't heard any of it. To conclude, I remain convinced that this man saved my life. After that, I couldn't go out alone at night for several weeks. A week after the incident, I went to the man's tobacco shop with flowers and chocolate to thank him. We both started crying, and the people present in the tobacco shop applauded.